Alright, I'm here in my room. I've got my computer turned on in front of me. I've got my microphone set up, and there's a notepad open to my notes about my podcast, It's Time to Rewind. Looks like they're open to the 39th scene of Memento that starts in color at 82 minutes and 23 seconds, with Natalie giving Leonard a beer on the house, and ends at 83 minutes and 9 seconds, with Natalie taking the beer away, claiming that it's dusty. There's also a Skype window open. Hang on. Who is this?
Bubbawheat, it's me. It's Eric Deutsch, your co-host for every single color scene in this movie.
Oh, of course. You'd think that I would get that by this point, but I'm still losing it. And who are you?
Well, it's Leandra again. I'm one of the podcasters for Rocky Horror Minute, and I'm here to talk about this little chunk of Memento.
Well, it's good to have you back, and this is the shortest color scene in the entire movie. It's only, I think, 47 seconds, and because of that, before we get to the scene, I figured this would be a good time to ask you what your history is with Memento. Do you remember what's the first time that you've seen this movie?
I first saw this movie right about when it came out, and I remember going, wow, Carrie-Anne Moss is in everything. And this was one of my better, happier memories of seeing Carrie-Anne Moss in something. Not so much Chocolat, but maybe I was just not feeling it at the time.
Yeah, I think I can only really remember seeing Carrie-Anne Moss in this movie, The Matrix, of course, and then I can't think of anything else that comes to mind up until Jessica Jones.
She was so good in Jessica Jones, though.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and jump into this scene. And, we get the Ferdy's bar coaster, which is something that we've seen several times already throughout this movie, and we know that this connection to Natalie. And do either of you remember seeing this scene for the first time? And, do you remember what you thought was going on with whenever he drinks the beer, and then the bar patron just starts immediately laughing?
Well, first of all, he's great, the bar patron, because it is such an evil laugh. It's just as we'll find out next week exactly why he's laughing, but he is absolutely loving what's going on there. Great casting, just this schlubby-looking dude with his evil laugh. The first time I saw it, I mean, I don't know that I thought specifically what it is that they do to the drink, but clearly, because by now we're near the end of the movie, so we know that he's not going to remember things, and we know that he's confused by the laughter, and he makes the little facial expression of like, something's different about this beer. We know they did something to it. I don't know that I figured it was phlegm and saliva, but clearly something was done.
My only initial reaction to that bit was, gosh, what's wrong with that cup?
Yeah, and I think it's funny too, because it is a very unique looking cup, because the barfly is drinking from a standard glass, clear glass, and he's got a shot glass next to him, but this is like a big pewter stein, which definitely stands out, and I feel like it's not something that you would often get served at a bar setting, although I suppose I'm not the best person to comment on that, because I don't really go out to bars very often at all.
Well, I used to go out to bars a lot, so I can say that I don't think I ever had a beer served in that kind of a cup in a bar.
Maybe at the Ren Fair.
Right. Yeah. That was my other thought, because I have been to Ren Fairs, and although usually those are like the collector's cups that you have to pay extra for.
Yes, I don't think that Natalie is giving him mead, but what an awful thing to do to someone.
Yeah. And, we get this hint at something else going on, because Natalie implies that she knows about Leonard's condition because of what that cop said, which I imagine she's talking about Teddy, and she talks a little bit more about him in the scene next week. But do you think that Natalie actually met Teddy beforehand, or do you think that that's like, actually, I wrote this before I wrote notes for next week, but I do remember that, she does talk about the cop coming into the bar and asking about him.
Yeah, she does.
But, yeah. Because initially I was wondering if it was like just second-hand information from Jimmy. But yeah, that's, Teddy clearly came into the bar, but I mean, technically we don't know for sure that it's Teddy, but I would imagine that, there's not anybody else that it really could be, right?
Unless you want to believe Teddy's story that we'll see later in either next week or 2 weeks from now, that he's talking about another cop, which is almost certainly fabricated.
Yeah. And then, this is a very short scene, and I think we do get some more, like, again, this feels like kind of Clueless. He's very bright and chipper Leonard, where it's almost like back to blank slate Leonard. And even though he's talking about his wife dying, like, he says it in kind of this oddly upbeat way. And we get another suspicious memory from Leonard. It's another, very quick flash, but we see this brief moment of his wife, still wrapped in the shower curtain, but she blinks.
Yeah, I feel like that lends credence to the theory that Catherine did not die during the attack, that maybe she recovered and she died because Leonard is really Sammy Jenkins and Leonard killed her giving her too much insulin. Like, why else show her eye blinking under the plastic like that? To show that she indeed, if his memory is to be relied upon, which of course it's, we're not 100% sure it can be, but if it is, why show that she was alive after she was covered with the plastic?
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of these little fragments are the truth of what actually happened, just trying to play out in Leonard's mind, but because he has replaced it with such a strong memory of something else, then he just can't allow himself to keep thinking about what that would actually have looked like.
Yeah, and this is before the audience knows, like, before the audience has heard Teddy's story about Leonard's wife being the one with diabetes. But this is technically after Leonard had that conversation. So it is possible that Teddy's comments did manage to kind of work his way into his memory and change his memory. But, Leandra, we haven't talked to you about this yet. Like, what is your thoughts about how connected Leonard and Sammy Jenkins are? Like, do you think that they're 100% the same person, and like all of Leonard's stories about Sammy Jenkins is actually about Leonard himself? Or do you think that they're completely separate people, or do you think there's like a little bit of, like, there's some overlap?
I think that Sammy Jenkins definitely existed. I just think that he might not have actually had the same affliction. And we spoke last time about how Leonard's version of the truth is just so easily manipulated. And I really think this is an instance where we see that even Leonard has manipulated his own memory. He has this kind of scaffolding of somebody that he can kind of grasp onto and go, no, this awful thing that happened that I can't quite shake, that happened to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good way to look at it. And, this entire movie is filled with a lot of unreliable narrators, and it's really about how memory is not as accurate as we think it is. So it does call into question a lot of things about Leonard's stories and Leonard's memories. And then, one last thing that I did notice, and I think we've talked a little bit about, but we haven't talked too much about, but I do want to call out the makeup department and like the Leonard scratches on his face. I think it's pretty clear in this one. He has these 2 scratches on his cheek that we see throughout the entire movie. And here I think they do a good job of making the scratches look more fresh than they were before, because they still have kind of the redness around them, since the scratch did happen just maybe a few hours ago at this point, versus earlier in the movie where it's days later and there's a little bit more healing. I think they do a good job of showing this progression of these scratches and how they look more fresh as the movie goes on.
I like that it's a good visual representation of the passage of time. It's yet another kind of soft reminder to the audience that time is essentially going backwards for us.
Just like Kramer's gigantic lollipop in the backwards Seinfeld episode.
And it's nice too that it is a very subtle thing, that it's, if it's there if you're looking for it, but it's not a distraction. And that wraps up my notes for this scene. It is very short. It's it just ends with I guess Leonard passing this test that we'll know a little bit more about next week, and Natalie taking the beer away, because I think partly it's because of him talking about his wife, so he does garner a little bit of sympathy, and so she's not going to make him finish the entire drink.
Mm-hmm.
But she will make him go through what she ends up making him go through earlier in the movie, but later for them.
Yeah, and we don't see it happen on screen, her convincing him or telling him he can come to her house.
Yeah, there is this like time jump. Yeah. Because this is one of the few moments, one of the few scenes where there is not a repetition between the end of this scene and the beginning of the previous scene. And there's not any sort of, like, it's not the next day either, because typically whenever that happens, it's like the next day and him waking up, but there's not that either. So I think it's interesting that they decided to do this. It almost feels like maybe there was a deleted scene, that maybe they shot the car ride, or there was another scene here and they decided not to use that.
I could see that.
But it's also, at this point in the movie, we don't necessarily need that repetition, because this is like nearly the end. And so, the audience knows the structure, so we don't necessarily need the repetition, even though we still will get a couple more moments of repetition in the future scenes. But that wraps up this scene. Thank you again, Leandra, for joining us here for these next few weeks. And once again, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to let everybody know where else they can find you online?
You can find me at rockyhorrorminute.com or any place that you can find your podcasts. Just look for Rocky Horror Minute.
And as always, thank you, Eric, for joining me as my co-host through this entire season. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show on all the podcatchers out there. Just search for It's Time to Rewind if you would like to use one that's different from what you're listening to right now. And we also have a Facebook page. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, and also have discussions about time loop movies and TV episodes, past, present, and future. And until next time, I assume I've already told you about Memento?
Only every time I see you.
On the house.
Thanks.
Oh, you really do have a problem.